Did you know that the image you've always thought was that of Jesus might not be what he actually looked like? Let's face it, history books and paintings haven't always told us the truth. For centuries, we relied on artistic interpretations, royal preferences, and idealized imagery. But now, science and digital reconstructions are giving us a peek into what some of history's most iconic figures likely looked like. Intrigued? Keep watching to see how history's famous faces truly appeared. 1. Jesus of Nazareth. For centuries, Jesus has been depicted as a tall, light-skinned man with flowing brown hair and soft blue eyes. This image has become so ingrained in Western culture that it's difficult to imagine him any other way. You'll see this version in church murals, stained glass, and Sunday school books around the world. But this portrayal is far more European than it is Middle Eastern, and it has more to do with medieval and Renaissance art than with actual history. Modern forensic experts have taken a scientific approach to reconstruct Jesus' appearance. They used skulls from the 1st century found in the region of Judea, combined with historical knowledge about the average build and features of Semitic men of that era. Using computerized tomography and facial reconstruction software, they built a realistic model of what Jesus may have looked like. This version of Jesus is a striking contrast to the popular image. He has dark brown skin, thick, curly black hair, and brown eyes. His nose is broad, and his features reflect the Semitic ancestry of a Jewish man living in 1st century Galilee. He looks like someone you might see in a crowded marketplace in ancient Israel, not a figure carved into a Gothic cathedral. This change not only alters our visual perception, but also brings us closer to understanding the historical and cultural context in which Jesus lived and preached. 2. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar has long been remembered as the brilliant general and shrewd politician who helped bring an end to the Roman Republic. Most of us are familiar with his marble busts, stoic, strong-jawed, and slightly balding. These sculptures, while informative, were created to emphasize power and idealism, not realism. But recent efforts by archaeologists and 3D artists have aimed to bring us a more authentic depiction. Using data from marble busts, coins, and even written descriptions by contemporaries, experts developed a lifelike rendering of Caesar's face. In the reconstruction, Caesar's features are much more relatable. His head is somewhat elongated, possibly reflecting a congenital skull deformity. His eyes are close set, and his skin shows signs of aging, including wrinkles and sagging. He doesn't look like a Roman god. He looks like a real man who spent his life in political battles, both on and off the battlefield. 3. David. Michelangelo's David is perhaps the most famous sculpture in Western art. Carved from marble in the early 1500s, David is shown as a muscular, nude young man, embodying the Renaissance ideal of physical beauty. His face is calm, his posture confident, and his body perfectly proportioned. Perhaps too perfect. Of course, David was a biblical figure, not a Greek demigod. Digital artist Bas Uterwijk used artificial intelligence and digital modeling to reconstruct what a real person named David might have looked like, based on historical context and artistic clues. The result is a youthful face with expressive eyes, curly hair, and warm olive-toned skin. His features are more grounded, less godlike, and more human. There's a hint of vulnerability in his gaze, and his face reflects the innocence and courage of a young shepherd who challenged a giant. This reconstruction brings David down from the pedestal and turns him back into a flesh-and-blood teenager, making his story even more inspiring. When we think of St. Nicholas today, we often picture Santa Claus, a plump, jolly man with rosy cheeks, a white beard, and a red suit. But the real St. Nicholas was a Greek bishop who lived in the 4th century in what is now Turkey. Historical artwork shows a serious-looking man with pale skin, sharp features, and religious attire. In the early 2000s, scientists used skeletal remains believed to belong to St. Nicholas to create a detailed reconstruction of his face. They scanned the skull and used computer models to build muscle, skin, and other soft tissues. The result is quite different from Santa Claus. This version of St. Nicholas has olive skin, a strong jaw, and a nose that appears to have been broken, possibly during his lifetime. His eyes are deep-set and serious, and his expression is intense. He looks like someone who lived through hardship and took his faith seriously. 5. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte is usually portrayed as a stern, ambitious man, short in stature, dressed in military uniform, and almost always shown with a hand tucked inside his coat. While that posture was meant to suggest discipline and composure, it also became a defining visual cue in his portraits. Shortly after Napoleon's death in 1821, a death mask was made of his face. Artists and scientists have used this mask, along with historical data, to digitally reconstruct his face. What we see is quite surprising. Napoleon appears more youthful than expected, with smooth skin and softer features. His nose is prominent, but his expression is far from menacing. He looks like someone you might trust to lead, but not necessarily someone who would declare himself Emperor of France. The reconstruction brings out the human side of a man often depicted as larger than life, and reminds us that even historic giants had ordinary faces. 6. George Washington. George Washington's image is instantly recognizable. Powdered hair, a solemn expression, and that distinctive 18th century fashion. This image, based on paintings by Gilbert Stuart, has become iconic, especially since it appears on the US dollar bill. But those portraits were idealized, meant to project dignity and leadership. Scientists and historians use 3D modeling, along with descriptions and a life mask taken during his lifetime, to recreate a more accurate image of Washington. The updated version shows a stronger, more rugged face. His skin shows signs of aging and hard labor, with noticeable lines around the eyes and mouth. His jaw is more pronounced, and his nose broader. This Washington looks like a man who spent time on the battlefield, who rode horses through harsh winters, and who shouldered the burdens of leadership. Seeing him this way brings a new level of respect for what he endured. 7. Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, Queen of Scots, is often depicted as a tragic beauty, tall, graceful, and elegant in finely embroidered gowns. Her portraits, created during and after her lifetime, emphasize her royal status and refined appearance. But many of these images were idealized, shaped by the politics and aesthetics of the time. Facial reconstruction expert Caroline Wilkinson used these portraits, as well as written descriptions and skeletal remains, to reconstruct what Mary might have really looked like. In this version, Mary has a rounder face with softer features. Her nose is more prominent and her lips fuller than typically shown. Her eyes carry a weightiness that reflects her difficult life, political imprisonment, personal loss, and eventual execution. While still attractive, she looks more like a real person who lived through real turmoil, not just a painted icon of doomed royalty. 8. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is often seen as the brainy, sophisticated statesman who wrote the Declaration of Independence. His portraits show a high forehead, neatly tied hair, and an expression of calm intellect. But painted portraits only tell part of the story. Fortunately, a life mask was made of Jefferson's face in 1825. This provided scientists with a rare opportunity to recreate his actual facial structure. The result is quite telling. Jefferson's cheekbones are high, his jawline firm, and his mouth slightly pursed, as if he's in deep thought. His eyes are focused, and the lines on his face suggest stress and long hours of work. He appears as a man constantly processing, calculating, and composing. This reconstruction adds another layer of depth to our understanding of Jefferson, not just as a writer and thinker, but as a person with emotional complexity. 9. Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I carefully crafted her image during her reign. She wore elaborate dresses, heavy makeup, and maintained a strict public persona as the Virgin Queen. In her portraits, she looks almost otherworldly: pale skin, high collars, and an emotionless gaze. These images were designed to promote power and purity, not vulnerability. But forensic scientists and historians wanted to find out what she really looked like. Using descriptions from her contemporaries and aging patterns from known portraits, they created a more realistic rendering. This version is far more grounded. Her face is lined with age, her eyes slightly sunken, and her mouth set in a firm, tired line. The makeup is gone, revealing a woman who bore the burdens of a kingdom. She still looks regal, but not untouchable. Gishanti Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is remembered as a cheerful intellectual, an inventor, writer, and founding father. Paintings usually show him as a bald, kindly old man with a knowing smile and round glasses. But Franklin lived a long, eventful life, and his appearance changed significantly over time. Artists and scientists used life masks, sculptures, and descriptions to build a fuller picture of how he looked. The modern image reveals a man with depth and humor in his eyes. His cheeks are fuller, and his forehead shows deep lines of thought and time. He looks approachable, yet clearly intelligent. You can imagine him tinkering with inventions, debating in salons, or writing witty letters by candlelight. This reconstruction shows Franklin as the vibrant, curious spirit he truly was. 11th. Richard III. Richard III's image has long been painted as a villainous tyrant, complete with a stern face and a sharp glare. Historical portraits often show him with pale skin, narrowed eyes, and a tightly sealed mouth, a look that screams, "Don't mess with me." These images cemented him as a harsh ruler, but science had something else to say. Thanks to the remarkable discovery of his remains under a parking lot in Leicester, researchers reconstructed his face using his skull. And surprise, the real Richard III looks more like a shy teenager than a power-hungry king. His boyish cheeks and soft eyes don't exactly match the ruthless persona history gave him. This version of Richard shakes up what we thought we knew, and oddly enough, he resembles Lord Farquaad from Shrek. Coincidence? Maybe. Legacy? Probably not what he had in mind. 12th King Tutankhamun. King Tut's golden mask is legendary. It's been the face of ancient Egypt for decades, representing elegance, power, and the mystery of a pharaoh's tomb. But when scientists got serious about reconstructing his face using CT scans, a very different young man emerged. Far from the radiant boy king in gold, Tutankhamun suffered from numerous health issues. He had a cleft palate, a club foot, and needed walking sticks just to move around. His face? He had an overbite, narrow chin, and wide hips, far from the idealized version we grew up seeing. Despite his physical struggles, his name still shines in the annals of history. Not bad for someone who only ruled for about a decade. Trizinasta Cleopatra. Cleopatra has long been portrayed as the ultimate beauty of the ancient world. We imagine her with perfectly arched eyebrows, dramatic eyeliner, and glowing skin. Movies and TV shows always show her as the stunning seductress of Caesar and Antony. The truth is, Cleopatra was more brains than beauty. Born into a Greek family, her features reflected that lineage. Coins from her time show a strong nose, a prominent jaw, and a far less idealized face than pop culture offers. But her power didn't come from her looks. She was smart, strategic, and spoke at least 9 languages. That's the real reason people were drawn to her. 14th Roman Emperor Nero. Nero's image in classical busts paints him as a masculine, commanding figure. His features are bold, his posture regal. He looks like someone you wouldn't want to challenge. But modern reconstructions tell a slightly different story. Based on historical texts and forensic reconstructions, Nero actually had bright red hair and freckles. Yes, the guy accused of burning Rome down had a fire-like crown himself. The reality adds an unexpected twist to his already fiery reputation. Maybe fiddling while Rome burned was more symbolic than we thought. 15. Johann Sebastian Bach. The only known painting of Bach presents him as a stern, serious man with powdered hair and a stocky build. It's the face we associate with classical music and disciplined genius. But Bach's grave was unmarked for years, and it wasn't until scientists examined a likely skull that we got a clearer picture. The reconstruction showed he had a thick neck, pronounced cheekbones, and softer facial features than we imagined. He still looks like someone who could ace a fugue, but now he seems more approachable. Like that intense music teacher who might also bake a mean apple strudel. On Altunja Nefertiti. Nefertiti's iconic bust is the very definition of timeless beauty. Symmetrical face, elongated neck, and regal headdress. But the reconstruction done in 2018 caused quite a stir. Based on a mummy believed to be hers, the digital model revealed a woman with refined features, but different skin tone and facial structure than many expected. Some argued about the accuracy, but the facial proportions seem consistent with historical art. Still, her striking features remain intact. The bone structure alone proves that she earned her reputation as one of Egypt's most alluring royals. 17. William Shakespeare. The famous bard's image comes from a handful of paintings, all showing him with a smooth face, receding hairline, and wise eyes. These portraits helped shape how we imagine the man who gave us Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet. However, scientists used his alleged death mask to reconstruct a more realistic version. This Shakespeare had weathered skin, a heavier brow, and a wider nose. The look of someone who spent time outdoors and lived through the grit of Elizabethan England. The reconstructed version feels more real, like someone who actually lived and wrote in that time, not just a classroom icon. 18. Henry VII. Henry VII is usually seen in paintings as a somber figure, with sharp features and tired eyes. The face of a man who ended the Wars of the Roses and began the Tudor dynasty. The scientific reconstruction based on his skull shows those features were pretty accurate, but it also adds depth to his face. A stronger jaw, fuller cheeks, and a more lifelike expression. This version feels more human, not just a figure in a history book. He looks like a man who carried the weight of a kingdom, but still managed to keep it all together. 19th Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is remembered as one of the fiercest conquerors in history. Born in 356 BC, this Macedonian king managed to build one of the largest empires ever known, stretching from Greece to parts of India. We've seen countless statues and romanticized paintings of him. Sharp cheekbones, curly golden hair, and an intense gaze that says, "I've never lost a battle." But let's be honest, those artworks were more about legacy than accuracy. Since no portraits from his lifetime exist, we're left to piece together his appearance from written descriptions and artistic interpretations long after his death. Some say he had one blue eye and one brown. Maybe. Others claim his hair was golden and his skin pale. It's all speculation. Now, thanks to AI reconstruction and a bit of modern science, we can see a more realistic version of Alexander's face. He still looks determined, still intense, but much more human. His nose is a little broader, his cheeks a bit fuller, and the imperfections make him all the more real. This is the version of Alexander that walked dusty battlefields and united nations. 20. King Louis XV. If you picture King Louis XV, you probably imagine powdered wigs, ornate suits, and a king who practically lived in Versailles. That's not far off. Louis ruled France from 1715 until 1774, and during that time, he was known for his fashionable taste and graceful appearance. He stood about 5 feet 10 inches, which made him taller than most of his peers. His slim build, pointed nose, and clean-shaven face gave him a refined and dignified look. The paintings we have of him show a confident monarch, stylish, poised, and always dressed like he owned the place. Because he did. But science isn't here for flattery. Using digital reconstructions based on his skull and period art, experts crafted a more grounded version of Louis XV's face. The end result? He still has noble features, but they're not as perfectly chiseled as some might expect. He looks like a man carrying the weight of ruling a restless country. Still elegant, just more real. 21st. Frédéric Chopin. Frédéric Chopin was the musical heart of the Romantic era. A Polish composer and virtuoso pianist, he created melodies that still echo through concert halls today. While we do have photographs of him, they're old, worn, and don't exactly do him justice. To truly capture Chopin's likeness, 3D artist Hadi Karimi teamed up with the Frédéric Chopin Institute. They used a detailed 3D scan of Chopin's death mask, originally taken shortly after he passed, to reconstruct his face with stunning accuracy. Karimi had to smooth out some areas around the chin and forehead, but the end result is chillingly lifelike. Chopin's eyes have a quiet sadness, and his long, elegant face carries the weight of a man who poured his soul into music. And while the old photos barely hinted at it, his sharp, hooked nose, considered a sign of intellect back then, adds character and presence to his features. 22. Maximilien Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre is one of the most polarizing figures from the French Revolution. Lawyer, politician, and revolutionary firebrand, he played a central role in reshaping France and sending people to the guillotine. You've probably seen paintings of him looking like a stern idealist in a powdered wig. But those images weren't based on first-hand sittings. Fortunately, we have something more concrete: his death mask. After Robespierre was executed in 1794, Madame Tussaud herself reportedly used his severed head to create a cast. That's morbid, yes, but historically valuable. Using this mask, researchers pieced together his facial structure to show what Robespierre likely looked like while alive. His face is thinner than imagined, his lips fuller, and his eyes more alert. He looks less like a mythical figure and more like a passionate man driven by big ideas and dangerous ideals. 23rd. Robert Burns. You may not recognize Robert Burns by sight, but you've heard his words. He's the Scottish poet behind Auld Lang Syne, the song millions sing every new year. Born in 1759, Burns wrote poems that stirred national pride and romantic longing. And while statues and paintings of him exist, they never really captured the full picture. Thanks to researchers at the University of Dundee, we now have a truer image. Scientists used a mix of art, sculpture, and forensic knowledge, along with what's known of Burns' remains, to reconstruct his face. The result is incredibly expressive. Burns has a thoughtful gaze, high cheekbones, and a mouth that seems ready to recite verse. His face feels approachable, with just enough ruggedness to suggest a man who lived through both joy and hardship. For someone whose words still move us today, it's fitting to finally see the man behind the pen. 24th. Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri, the legendary author of the Divine Comedy, gave the world one of its most vivid and enduring depictions of the afterlife: hell, purgatory, and heaven. His words shaped how generations imagined Satan, brimstone, and even the idea of sinners suffering in circles of torment. So it's no surprise that artists painted him as a serious, sharp-featured man with a prominent hooked nose, once thought to be a sign of wisdom. But here's the catch: noses are made of cartilage, which doesn't survive long after death. So while the famous hook nose can't be confirmed, the facial reconstruction still included a similar shape out of respect for tradition. That said, the rest of Dante's face, way softer than those dramatic portraits would have you believe. One big surprise? His brow wasn't nearly as stern. Gone is the intimidating literary titan. This modern recreation shows a man with a humbler face, someone who looks more like a curious thinker than a fearsome prophet. Sure, he could probably still spin a great story, but if posters were a thing back then, folks might have walked right past him without a second glance. Major catfish energy. 25th St. Anthony. St. Anthony earned sainthood faster than most, just 1 year after his death. Today, he's known as the patron saint of lost things, a title that stems from stories of his life and miracles. Most portraits show him as a gentle, youthful man with delicate features, almost ethereal, with soft cheeks, wide-set eyes, and that signature button nose. But let's just say, the facial reconstruction tells a different story. For starters, his classic bowl cut. Way less neat in real life. No clippers back then, after all. And those soft, almost feminine features? Not quite. St. Anthony had a thicker neck, stronger jawline, and an overall sturdier build than his portraits would have you believe. Still, some details held up. The wide-set moon-shaped eyes, the button nose, and the Cupid's bow lips? All accurate. One major adjustment: his skin tone. He likely had much darker skin than the pale version you often see in religious art. So while his portraits weren't completely off, the real St. Anthony was a lot more rugged than people thought. Definitely more medieval man of the people than porcelain saint.